I'm Allison Davis, 29, staring at my phone as my parents' number flashes on the screen after 8 months of silence. The last time we spoke was at that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner when they gifted my sister Rebecca $150,000 for a house, while calling my photography career a disappointment. The contrast was crystal clear. Her traditional path versus my artistic journey. That night, I finally understood that no achievement of mine would ever measure up in their eyes. Walking away was the hardest decision I've ever made and the most liberating. Before I dive into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories about finding strength when family fails you. Growing up in our pristine colonial home in suburban Boston meant living within carefully defined expectations. Our lawn was always perfectly manicured, our achievements prominently displayed, and our family image meticulously maintained. My father James built his reputation as one of Boston's most respected corporate attorneys, while my mother Patricia had given up her executive career to manage our family with the same efficiency she once applied to her corporate team. From my earliest memories, our family operated like a well-oiled machine with clearly defined roles. My sister Rebecca, 4 years older and seemingly perfect in every way, embodied everything my parents valued: analytical thinking, practical ambition, and unwavering focus on conventional success. With her straight-A report cards, debate team trophies, and early acceptance to Harvard, she set a standard that seemed impossible to match. I was different from the beginning. Where Rebecca calculated, I created. While she memorized legal precedents, I noticed how light filtered through trees or the subtle expressions on people's faces. My parents viewed these differences with barely concealed disappointment. Allison has her head in the clouds, my mother would say to family friends, with that tight smile that never reached her eyes. Rebecca always knew exactly what she wanted. The pattern was established early. When Rebecca won the state math competition in 7th grade, my parents threw an elaborate party and bought her a laptop. When my photography was selected for a citywide student exhibition that same year, my father glanced at the acceptance letter and said, "That's nice, but don't let it distract from your real studies." By high school, the divide had become a chasm. Rebecca was class president, valedictorian, and on track for an Ivy League education followed by law school, the path my father had charted for both of us. Meanwhile, I spent hours in the darkroom my photography teacher had allowed me to use after school, finding my voice through images rather than arguments. My bedroom walls showcased my evolving style. Portraits that captured subtle emotions, urban landscapes that told hidden stories. My parents viewed this passion as a phase to be tolerated, not a calling to be nurtured. "You can't eat photographs," my father would say whenever I shared a new accomplishment. The breaking point came during my senior year when acceptance letters arrived. I'd been admitted to both Dartmouth, which would have pleased my parents, and the Rhode Island School of Design, which had offered me a partial scholarship based on my portfolio. The choice seemed obvious to me, but announcing my decision unleashed a storm at home. "We didn't raise you to throw away opportunities," my father thundered. "Art school is for people without better options." My mother was more tactical in her disapproval. "Sweetheart, why not major in business at Dartmouth and minor in photography? That's the sensible approach." After weeks of arguments, they reluctantly agreed to pay for RISD, but not without making clear their disappointment. "We're investing in this against our better judgment," my father said as he wrote the first tuition check. "Don't make us regret it." Through 4 years of art school, every phone call home included pointed questions. Had I considered switching to graphic design instead of fine art photography? Was I networking with people who could offer real jobs after graduation? Had I thought about law school applications as a backup plan? Despite the constant doubt, I flourished at RISD. My professors recognized what my parents couldn't see: that my eye for composition and ability to capture authentic emotion were exceptional. By graduation, my thesis exhibition had sold several pieces and earned attention from a small gallery in New York. When my parents attended my graduation, their congratulations came with qualifiers. "We're proud you finished," my mother said. Emphasis on finished rather than accomplished. My father added, "Now comes the hard part, turning this into something practical." As I packed my belongings into a rented van bound for a tiny Brooklyn apartment I'd be sharing with two other RISD graduates, I was determined to prove my path was valid. I knew building a photography career would be challenging, but I believed in my vision and ability. What I didn't realize then was that the real challenge wouldn't be establishing my career. It would be breaking free from seeking the approval my parents were never going to give. My first apartment in Brooklyn was barely 400 square feet, shared with two other creative graduates in a building with questionable heating and a perpetually broken elevator. We converted half the living room into a makeshift studio where I could photograph clients when my roommates were out. This was about as far from my parents' Boston suburb as you could get, both geographically and philosophically. Those first 3 years in New York were a blur of hustle and determination. During the day, I worked as an assistant to an established commercial photographer, learning the business side of the industry while making barely enough to cover rent and ramen. Evenings and weekends were split between building my portfolio, working side gigs, photographing events, and networking relentlessly at gallery openings with my last remaining business cards clutched in my hand. Meanwhile, Rebecca's trajectory continued its perfect upward arc. After graduating at the top of her class from Harvard Law, she secured a position at Caldwell & Barnes, one of Boston's most prestigious corporate law firms. Within 2 years, she'd been fast-tracked for partnership consideration. Her engagement to Thomas, another attorney from a well-connected Boston family, completed what my parents saw as the perfect picture. The contrast in my parents' reactions to our respective lives couldn't have been more stark. When Rebecca closed her first major corporate acquisition deal, my mother called everyone in her social circle. My daughter just handled a $60 million merger, she would beam, before launching into all the details she was probably not supposed to share. When I had my first photographs accepted into a small but well-respected gallery's emerging artists show, my mother's response was, "That's nice, dear. Is it paying anything?" The pattern continued with painful predictability. Rebecca and Thomas bought their first condo in Boston's exclusive Beacon Hill neighborhood, and my parents hosted an elaborate housewarming, flying in family members from across the country. I got my first tiny studio space in Brooklyn, and my father asked if this meant I was finally getting serious about building a business instead of just taking pictures. The holidays became particularly difficult to navigate. 3 Christmases after graduation, we gathered at my parents' home as usual. Rebecca arrived with Thomas, both of them dressed impeccably, bringing expensive wines and stories about their recent vacation in the Maldives. I arrived with a carefully framed portrait I'd taken of our childhood home as a gift for my parents, wearing the one nice outfit I owned, having barely scraped together enough for the flight home. After dinner, as we sat around the fireplace exchanging gifts, my parents handed Rebecca an envelope. Inside was a check for $25,000. "Just because we're so proud of how hard you've worked," my father explained. "You deserve to enjoy the fruits of your success." My gift came next, a $50 gift card to an office supply store and 2 books, How to Make a Living as a Creative and Financial Planning for Irregular Incomes. The message couldn't have been clearer if they'd written it across the ceiling in neon letters. Later that night, I tried to talk to my mother about how their different approach to supporting us made me feel. "Honey, it's just different life stages," she explained with the patient tone one might use with a confused child. "Rebecca and Thomas are establishing themselves. They have a mortgage. They're planning for children soon. You're still experimenting." She said the last word like it was a phase. Most people outgrew by my age. I returned to New York more determined than ever to succeed on my terms. Over the next 2 years, I gradually built my reputation, specializing in portrait photography that told personal stories. I developed a distinctive style that emphasized authenticity over perfection, capturing subjects in environments that revealed something essential about their character and experiences. Small exhibitions led to features in photography blogs. Networking connections led to commercial assignments that helped fund my artistic work. I started teaching weekend workshops that brought in additional income while allowing me to share my passion with others. By my 27th birthday, I'd reached a point where I was paying my bills through photography alone. No small achievement in one of the world's most competitive and expensive cities. My work had been featured in several respected galleries, and I'd built a modest but growing client list for portrait commissions. Yet every accomplishment I shared with my parents was met with the same tepid response. "That's nice, but is it sustainable? Or have you thought about expanding into wedding photography?" That's where the real money is. No matter what I achieved, it never seemed to register as legitimate success in their eyes. While Rebecca received congratulatory gifts for each career milestone, my exhibitions and publications earned brief acknowledgments at best. The disparity was painful, but I'd grown so accustomed to it that I almost stopped noticing. What I didn't realize was that the most dramatic illustration of their unequal investment in our lives was yet to come. 14 months ago, an email arrived that nearly stopped my heart. Josephine Archer, curator at the highly respected Archer Contemporary Gallery in Chelsea, had seen my work at a group show and wanted to discuss featuring me in their Emerging Visions exhibition, a showcase known for launching photography careers to new heights. Previous artists featured had gone on to museum exhibitions, teaching positions at prestigious universities, and significant gallery representation. This was the opportunity I'd been working toward for years. A solo section within the exhibition would require 15 to 20 new large-format prints, custom framing, an artist statement booklet, and promotional materials. The gallery would handle some costs, but as an emerging artist, I would need to invest significantly in production. After carefully calculating expenses, the total came to just over $15,000. More money than I'd ever spent at once on anything. Between my savings and a small personal loan I could qualify for, I was still about $7,000 short. I'd exhausted my credit cards paying for new equipment the previous year. For days, I wrestled with the decision that felt both obvious and impossible, asking my parents for help. Despite years of dismissal and unequal treatment, surely they would recognize the legitimacy of this opportunity. This wasn't about funding an art hobby. This was a business investment in a career-making exhibition. After rehearsing the conversation countless times, I called them on a Sunday evening when I knew they'd both be home. I carefully explained the opportunity, the gallery's reputation, and the potential career impact. I outlined the costs, what I'd already secured, and the exact amount I needed to borrow. I emphasized that this was a loan I would repay, not a gift, and offered to draw up a formal agreement. The silence on the other end, when I finished speaking, should have prepared me for what came next. "Allison," my father began in his courtroom voice, "don't you think it's time to be realistic about your situation? You're approaching 30, with no retirement savings, no property, and now you want to go $7,000 deeper into debt for some pictures?" "They're not just some pictures, Dad," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This is a significant professional opportunity, the kind that changes careers." "You know what would change your career?" he countered. "Getting a real job like your sister, something with benefits, stability, a clear advancement path. You've been playing with cameras for years now, and what do you have to show for it? More debt?" My mother joined in with her particular brand of concerned disappointment. "We just worry about your future, sweetie. All these little gallery shows are nice, but when does it turn into something substantial? Rebecca was already making 6 figures at your age." The conversation deteriorated from there, circling through familiar criticisms of my life choices, comparisons to Rebecca's financial security, and thinly veiled suggestions that I'd wasted my education. "So you won't help me," I finally said, cutting through their latest round of concerns. "We don't think it would be responsible of us to enable this." "Continuation of impractical choices," my father replied. "We don't invest in risky ventures without a solid business plan." The irony wasn't lost on me. They had invested tens of thousands in Rebecca's law school education and now her house, but $7,000 for my career opportunity was deemed too risky. After hanging up, I sat on my apartment floor and allowed myself 15 minutes of complete breakdown, ugly crying, cursing, the works. Then I washed my face, opened my laptop, and began researching alternative funding options. The next week was a blur of grant applications, reaching out to former clients, and exploring high-interest loans I'd previously avoided. Eventually, I secured the remaining funds through a combination of an advance on a commercial project and a loan with an interest rate that made my stomach turn. But I was determined not to let this opportunity slip away, regardless of the cost. As I submitted the final paperwork to the gallery and began planning the new work for the exhibition, I couldn't shake a realization that had crystallized during that phone call with my parents. No achievement of mine would ever be significant enough in their eyes, unless it followed their prescribed definition of success. My work would always be playing with cameras. My exhibitions always little gallery shows. My income always insufficient compared to the corporate benchmark they measured by. For the first time, I stopped believing that one day I'd finally do something impressive enough to earn their respect. Instead, I channeled all my energy into creating the strongest body of work I possibly could. Not for their approval, but for myself and the audience that actually understood what I was trying to accomplish. The 3 months leading up to the Archer Contemporary exhibition were the most intense of my professional life. I barely slept, working through nights to perfect each image in the series I titled Unseen: Portraits of American Resilience. The collection featured people who had overcome significant personal challenges without recognition: the night shift worker putting herself through medical school, the former addict now counseling teens, the refugee who built a thriving community garden in an urban food desert. Each large-format portrait was accompanied by a smaller environmental image that provided context to their story. My goal was to challenge viewers' preconceptions about success, struggle, and the dignity of perseverance outside the spotlight. As the opening night approached, doubt crept in despite my exhaustion. Had I overextended myself financially for an opportunity that wouldn't pay off? Was I presenting work too personal and political for a commercial breakthrough? Would anyone even show up? The evening of the opening, I arrived early to find a line already forming outside the gallery. Josephine, the curator, greeted me with obvious excitement. "The advance press coverage has been exceptional," she said. "Several collectors specifically asked about your section of the exhibition." What followed was a night that felt surreal. My work displayed in a prestigious Chelsea gallery, strangers engaging deeply with each image, art critics taking notes, red sold dots appearing beside multiple pieces within the first hour. By midnight, I'd sold over half the collection, with the gallery already requesting additional prints to meet demand. Martin Chen, photography critic for Art Forum, cornered me near the end of the evening. "Your work shows remarkable maturity," he said. "The technical skill is evident, but it's your ability to capture authentic dignity in your subjects that stands out. I'll be watching your career with interest." In the rush of the successful opening, I'd almost forgotten that my family was coming to the exhibition the following weekend. I'd sent them an invitation weeks earlier, half expecting them to decline. To my surprise, they'd agreed to attend, and I allowed myself a small hope that seeing my work in this setting, legitimized by the prestigious gallery, the sales, the critical reception, might finally help them understand what I'd been working toward all these years. That Saturday, I spotted my parents and Rebecca entering the gallery, looking somewhat out of place among the art crowd. I waved them over, trying to calm the familiar anxiety their presence always triggered. "The space is lovely," my mother offered as her first comment, surveying the gallery. "Though I imagine the rent must be astronomical. How do these places stay in business?" I began walking them through the exhibition, explaining my concept, the stories behind the portraits, and the technical challenges I'd overcome. My father nodded occasionally, while Rebecca seemed genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions about several images. As we reached the center of my exhibition space, I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. "Yes, that's my daughter's display," my father was saying to another gallery visitor who had apparently recognized him from my artist bio. "We're just here supporting her little photography hobby. The real estate in this neighborhood is quite impressive, isn't it?" Reminds me of the venue for Rebecca's wedding reception, my other daughter, though that was considerably larger, of course. My mother joined in. "We always encourage creative expression, even if it's not the most practical career choice." They hadn't realized I was within earshot, and I stepped away before they noticed me, my chest tight with a familiar pain. Less than 20 feet away, Martin Chen was engaged in animated conversation with the gallery owner about my work, describing it as an important emerging voice in contemporary portraiture. The contrast was dizzying. professional validation from respected industry figures alongside my parents' continued minimization of my work as a little hobby they were humoring. When the evening concluded, my family offered polite congratulations that felt hollow after what I'd overheard. "The pictures are very nice, dear," my mother said. "The frames must have been quite expensive." Rebecca, at least, seemed genuinely impressed. "These are incredible, Allison. I had no idea your work had reached this level. You've really created something meaningful here." As they prepared to leave, my father patted my shoulder and offered what he clearly thought was encouragement. "Keep at it. Maybe this will turn into something more substantial eventually." I smiled and thanked them for coming, but inside, something had shifted. For years, I'd been chasing their approval like a mirage in the desert, always visible in the distance but dissolving whenever I got close. The exhibition should have been unmistakable evidence of professional success, yet they still couldn't see it. That night, alone in my apartment, surrounded by congratulatory messages from colleagues and reviews from the opening, I confronted a painful question. Why was I still trying to win validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it? What would ever be enough? The answer was both liberating and heartbreaking. Nothing would ever be enough. No achievement in my chosen field would ever satisfy their particular definition of success. And perhaps it was time to stop expecting it to. Thanksgiving has always been sacred in the Davis family calendar. My mother transforms our childhood home into a showcase that could be featured in any lifestyle magazine. Heirloom china perfectly arranged on the mahogany dining table, floral centerpieces that subtly complement the seasonal decorations, and a menu that balances traditional favorites with gourmet upgrades. 8 months ago, I arrived at this familiar tableau with a mix of dread and determination. Since the exhibition, my career had continued its upward trajectory. I'd secured gallery representation, received a prestigious grant to continue my portrait series, and been featured in 2 national photography publications. I was finally establishing financial stability doing work I believed in. Despite our rocky history, I'd decided to approach the holiday with openness. Perhaps with my growing professional recognition, my parents might finally see my career as legitimate. Rebecca and Thomas arrived shortly after me, both looking impeccable as usual, in coordinating outfits that somehow telegraphed both success and effortless style. The initial hour passed with surface-level pleasantries. We sipped my father's carefully selected wine while exchanging sanitized updates about our lives. My mother inquired about my picture-taking with the same tone she might use to ask about a casual hobby, while enthusiastically drawing out details about Rebecca's latest corporate acquisition deal. As we moved to the dining room, the table looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting. If Rockwell had access to Williams-Sonoma and a professional food stylist, my father carved the turkey with surgical precision while my mother ensured everyone's crystal water goblets remained perfectly filled. "We actually have some exciting news to share," Rebecca announced as we began serving sides. She exchanged a glance with Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. "We're expecting. The baby is due in July." My parents' reaction was immediate and effusive. My mother actually clapped her hands together before jumping up to embrace Rebecca. My father beamed with pride, immediately raising his glass in a toast to the next generation of the Davis family. "Congratulations," I said sincerely, genuinely happy for my sister despite the familiar pang of seeing how easily she secured our parents' approval. "You'll be amazing parents." The next 20 minutes were devoted to pregnancy details, due dates, and my parents' eager anticipation of their first grandchild. As the excitement settled slightly, Rebecca mentioned they had begun looking at larger houses in Newton, an upscale suburb outside Boston. "The market is competitive, but we found a beautiful colonial with enough space for a proper nursery and playroom," she explained. "The yard is perfect, and the school district is exceptional." My father nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking, planning ahead for schools already. Which brings us to something your mother and I wanted to discuss," he continued, setting down his fork with a deliberate motion I recognized from childhood. The gesture that signaled an important pronouncement was coming. "Rebecca, Thomas, your mother and I have been thinking about how we can support this next chapter of your lives," he said, his tone warm with pride. "We've decided to give you $150,000 toward your new home as an early inheritance. We consider it an investment in our grandchild's future. My mother reached over to squeeze Rebecca's hand. We're so proud of how you've built your lives. You've made such sensible choices, and we want to help secure that beautiful future you're creating. The table fell silent for a moment as the announcement settled. Rebecca appeared genuinely surprised and moved, while Thomas straightened his already perfect posture into something approaching attention. That's incredibly generous. Rebecca finally said. We don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, my mother assured her. You've earned our support by establishing yourselves so responsibly. We're just happy we can contribute to your family's foundation. I sat frozen, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, trying to process what I'd just heard. The sum was staggering, far more than I'd asked to borrow for my exhibition, an amount that could have transformed my career trajectory had I received even a fraction of it as support. My initial shock gave way to a hollow feeling as the conversation continued around me. I placed my fork down carefully, conscious of maintaining my composure, while a lifetime of disparate treatment crystallized into this single, unmistakable moment. After several minutes of discussion about house features and neighborhood benefits, my mother turned to me with what seemed like an afterthought. Allison, you've been quiet. Tell us about your latest projects. Your father mentioned seeing something about your exhibition in the alumni newsletter. The transition was so abrupt, so clearly an obligatory gesture after lavishing attention on Rebecca, that I almost laughed. Instead, I took a steady breath. The exhibition went extremely well, I said, keeping my voice even. Several pieces were acquired by private collectors, and the Museum of Contemporary Photography purchased one for their permanent collection. Oh? My father raised his eyebrows slightly. So, you're finally making money with those photos? The dismissive phrasing stung. But I pushed forward. Yes, I am. But more importantly, the artistic recognition is opening significant doors. The museum acquisition is particularly meaningful in the industry. Well, that's nice, my mother interrupted, clearly not registering the professional significance. It must be a relief to have some income from your hobby. It's not a hobby, Mom, I said, the words emerging more sharply than I'd intended. It's my career. One I've worked extremely hard to build. An uncomfortable silence descended on the table. Rebecca glanced between us, while Thomas suddenly became very interested in precisely arranging his silverware. Of course, dear, my mother said with a placating smile. We just meant it's good you're finding some success with your creative pursuits. I could feel the conversation slipping into familiar territory, my parents minimizing my work while I desperately tried to make them understand its legitimacy. But something felt different this time. Perhaps it was witnessing the $150,000 gift that had been casually bestowed on my sister while I'd been denied a much smaller loan for my career. Perhaps it was years of accumulated disappointment finally reaching critical mass. You know, I said carefully, I've been thinking about what just happened here. Rebecca announces a pregnancy and house hunting, and you immediately offer $150,000. Meanwhile, when I asked to borrow less than a tenth of that amount for a career-defining exhibition, you called it a risky venture and suggested I get a real job. My father's expression hardened. That's entirely different. Rebecca and Thomas have established themselves responsibly. They have stable careers. They're starting a family. Supporting their home purchase is a sound investment. And supporting my career wasn't? I asked. My voice quiet but firm. We've always supported Rebecca's sensible choices, my mother said. If you'd made better decisions, maybe you'd be in a position to buy a house too. The room seemed to still as her words hung in the air. The subtext was suddenly text, plainly spoken and impossible to misinterpret. I see, I said, placing my napkin beside my plate. So this isn't about the money itself, it's about approving of our choices. Don't be dramatic, Allison, my father said dismissively. We've supported you too. Who paid for that art school tuition? Yes, you paid for my education. Reluctantly and with constant reminders of your disapproval, I acknowledged. But since then, Rebecca gets celebrated for every achievement while mine are treated as cute distractions. She gets $25,000 just because gifts while I get self-help books. And now she gets $150,000 for a house, while I couldn't get a loan for a tenth of that amount for my career. That's not fair, Allison. My father's voice rose slightly. Your sister has made practical choices that have led to clear success. You've chosen a path with limited prospects and financial instability. My work is in a museum's permanent collection, I said incredulously. I have gallery representation. I support myself entirely through my art, in one of the most expensive cities in the country. By any measure in my field, that's remarkable success. By any measure in your field, my father repeated with emphasis. But let's be honest, compared to what Rebecca has accomplished, you're still figuring things out. She's established. You're still a disappointment compared to the potential you had. The word disappointment hit like a physical blow. There it was, finally spoken aloud after being implied for most of my adult life. I looked around the table, at my father's dismissive frustration, my mother's pained embarrassment, Rebecca's uncomfortable silence, and Thomas's studied neutrality, and something inside me simply released. The need for their approval, the hope that they might someday recognize my path as valid, the desire to be seen as equal to my sister, all of it suddenly felt like chains I'd been carrying for years. I stood up slowly, surprisingly calm. Thank you for clarifying where I stand, I said. I've spent my entire adult life trying to earn your respect while staying true to my own path. But I see now that was never going to happen. You can't respect what you don't value. Allison, sit down, my mother urged. You're overreacting. I'm not, I said with certainty. I'm finally seeing clearly. I don't need to keep seeking approval from people who fundamentally don't respect my choices or recognize my achievements. I picked up my bag and coat. I'm done trying to convince you that my life has value on its own terms. I won't be in touch for a while. I need space from this dynamic. When you're ready to acknowledge the different treatment and apologize for it, you know how to reach me. My father started to rise, his expression thunderous. Now, listen here. No, I interrupted calmly. I've listened for 29 years. I'm done listening now. I walked out of the dining room, through the immaculate foyer, and out the front door, ignoring their calls to come back. As I drove away, tears streamed down my face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally setting down a burden I hadn't fully realized I was carrying. The first few days after walking out of Thanksgiving dinner were a storm of conflicting emotions. Guilt surfaced unexpectedly. The lifetime of conditioning that insisted family obligations superseded personal boundaries was difficult to silence. Doubt crept in during quiet moments. Was I overreacting? Was cutting contact too extreme? Had I just ruined the most fundamental relationships in my life? But alongside these difficult feelings came something unexpected: relief. The constant pressure to translate my accomplishments into terms my parents would value had been exhausting. The perpetual disappointment when they failed to recognize my achievements had become a predictable wound I reopened with every interaction. Without that cycle of hope and letdown, I found myself breathing more easily. The first week brought a barrage of contact attempts. My parents left voicemails that ranged from angry, "Your behavior was completely inappropriate," to minimizing, "You're making a mountain out of a molehill," to guilt-inducing, "Your mother is very upset by your melodrama." I listened to each one, then deleted them without responding. By the second week, their approach shifted to acting as though the conflict had been a minor disagreement rather than a fundamental rupture. "We should all get together for dinner next weekend and put this unpleasantness behind us," my father suggested in one message. My mother sent an email about Christmas plans, as though nothing had happened. I finally responded with a brief, clear email. I meant what I said at Thanksgiving. I need space from our relationship until you can acknowledge the unequal treatment and apologize for it. Please respect my boundary. Then I muted their contact channels without blocking them entirely, leaving a door slightly ajar while protecting my peace. Rebecca's approach was more complicated. Initially, she served as our parents' proxy, calling to tell me I was tearing the family apart over nothing and should just apologize so we can move forward. When that failed, she shifted to acknowledging some validity in my perspective while still pressuring me to reconcile. "Look, I get that mom and dad can be difficult," she said during one call. "But they're getting older, and family is family. Can't you just let it go for everyone's sake?" "This isn't about one difficult dinner," I explained. "It's about a lifetime of being treated as less valuable because I chose a different path." I'm not asking them to change their opinions, just to acknowledge the pattern and apologize for it. If they can't do that, what exactly am I coming back to? After a few attempts, even Rebecca stopped pushing, though she occasionally sent updates about her pregnancy and house hunting, messages I responded to warmly, making it clear my issue wasn't with her but with our parents' treatment. With the constant noise of trying to earn parental approval suddenly silenced, I found myself with unexpected emotional and mental space. On the recommendation of a friend, I found a therapist specializing in family dynamics who helped me untangle decades of complicated feelings. "The inequality you described isn't uncommon, doctor," Marshall explained during one session, "but its persistence and your parents' inability to acknowledge it even when directly confronted suggests a deeply entrenched pattern. Your decision to create distance isn't about punishment, it's about protection." Those therapy sessions helped me recognize how the desire for parental approval had influenced not just my relationship with my family, but aspects of my creative work as well. I'd been unconsciously shaping parts of my artistic voice to be more commercially viable, more conventionally successful, qualities I thought might finally earn my parents' respect. As I released that burden, my photography evolved. I took more creative risks, pursued projects based solely on their artistic merit rather than their potential for mainstream recognition. Ironically, this authentic approach resonated more deeply with audiences and critics alike. Josephine, the gallery owner who had given me my breakthrough opportunity, became something of a mentor. When I shared some of my family history during a post-exhibition dinner, she nodded with recognition. "I've seen this countless times with artists," she told me. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the least equipped to validate our creative paths. They're too invested in their own vision of who we should be." Without the constant undercurrent of seeking parental approval, I found myself forging deeper connections with people who genuinely understood and valued my work. My circle of friends expanded beyond fellow photographers to include writers, painters, musicians, people who recognize the universal challenges of creative pursuits. My friendship with Maya, a writer I met at an interdisciplinary arts workshop, became particularly important. Unlike the competitive undertones that had characterized many of my previous relationships, our connection was built on mutual support and genuine appreciation for each other's work. "It's like you've removed a filter that was muting your colors," she observed one evening as we reviewed my latest portfolio. "These images feel more distinctly yours somehow." Professionally, the 8 months of no contact coincided with unexpected growth. The museum acquisition led to interest from other institutions. A prestigious art magazine published a feature on my portrait series. A university invited me to give a guest lecture on narrative photography. Each of these accomplishments felt different without the reflexive urge to translate them into terms my parents might value. I could simply experience them as they were meaningful milestones in a career I had built with determination and vision. The financial aspects of my life improved as well. Without the emotional drain of trying to prove my worth to skeptical parents, I could focus more energy on the business side of my career. I negotiated better terms with galleries, pursued grants more aggressively, and expanded my teaching to include online workshops that reached a global audience. Most surprisingly, my relationship with Rebecca evolved during this period of family separation. Without our parents as an audience, the comparative dynamic that had defined our relationship since childhood began to fade. Our conversations became more honest, less performative. "I've always envied your courage," she admitted during one phone call, 6 months into my estrangement from our parents. "Following your passion, despite all the pressure to conform. I sometimes wonder what I might have done if I hadn't been so focused on meeting expectations. And I envied your certainty," I confessed. "You always seemed so sure of your path." For the first time in our adult lives, we began to see each other as allies rather than competitors in an unspoken contest for parental approval. As Thanksgiving approached again, marking almost a full year of no contact with my parents, I realized how much my life had changed. The absence of their critical voices had created space for growth I hadn't known was possible. I had built a life that was authentically mine, creatively fulfilling, professionally successful, and emotionally balanced. The door to reconciliation remained unlocked but firmly closed until they could meet the simple condition I'd set: acknowledge the pattern of unequal treatment and apologize for it. In the meantime, I had discovered that family could be defined by more than blood. It could be built from connections based on mutual respect, understanding, and genuine support. The email from National Photography Review arrived on a Wednesday morning with the subject line, "Feature Confirmation, December Issue." I'd submitted a portfolio months earlier but had almost forgotten about it amid other projects. Opening the message, I discovered they wanted to run an 8-page spread on my work, including a cover feature and in-depth interview. NPR wasn't just any publication. It was the most widely respected photography magazine in the country, with a circulation that reached both industry professionals and mainstream art enthusiasts. A cover feature was the kind of exposure that transformed careers, opening doors to museum exhibitions, book deals, and international recognition. 2 days after confirming the feature, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen on my screen in 8 months: Mom and Dad. I stared at it, heart suddenly racing, before answering with a cautious, "Hello? Allison." My father's voice came through, sounding strangely tentative. "How are you?" "I'm well," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "This is unexpected." A brief pause followed before he continued. "We saw the announcement about your feature in National Photography Review. That's quite an achievement." The realization landed with a mixture of amusement and resignation. After 8 months of silence, what had finally prompted contact wasn't concern for my well-being or reflection on our relationship. It was public recognition they couldn't ignore. "Thank you," I said simply, waiting to see where this would go. "Your mother and I thought perhaps it's time we all talked," he continued. "Put the past behind us and move forward as a family." My mother's voice joined in, apparently on speakerphone. "We've missed you, sweetheart. Rebecca's baby shower is next month, and Christmas is coming up. It doesn't feel right without you." Neither of them mentioned the conditions I'd set for resuming contact. No acknowledgement of the unequal treatment. No apology for their dismissive attitude toward my career and choices. They were simply reaching out now that my success had become too visible to dismiss as a hobby or phase. "I appreciate you calling," I said carefully. "But when I left last Thanksgiving, I was clear about what would need to happen before we resumed contact. Has anything changed on that front?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Allison," my father said, his voice taking on the slightly patronizing tone I knew so well, "families disagree sometimes. That's normal. But holding grudges isn't healthy. We're willing to move past our differences." "I'm not holding a grudge," I explained calmly. "I set a boundary. I said I needed space until you could acknowledge the pattern of treating me and my choices as less valuable than Rebecca and hers. Has your perspective on that changed?" "We've always supported both our daughters," my mother interjected, sounding wounded. "We may have had concerns about your career choice, but that was out of love and worry for your future." "The issue isn't that you had concerns," I clarified. "It's that you consistently devalued my path while celebrating Rebecca's. You gave her $150,000 for a house, but wouldn't loan me a fraction of that for a career opportunity. You called my work a hobby, even as it was being recognized by major institutions." My father's sigh came through clearly. "We may have been traditional in our view of success," he conceded. "But we're reaching out now. Isn't that what matters?" "What matters is whether anything has fundamentally changed," I replied. "Are you calling because you've reflected on the dynamic I described and recognize it as problematic? Or are you calling because my success has now been validated by an institution you respect?" The silence that followed provided its own answer. "We're trying to rebuild our family," my mother finally said, skillfully avoiding my question. "Rebecca is about to have a baby. Wouldn't it be nice to put this unpleasantness behind us and come together for these important moments?" I closed my eyes, centering myself before responding. "I would love to be present for important family moments," I said truthfully. but not at the cost of returning to a dynamic where I'm treated as less than. My boundary hasn't changed. I need acknowledgement of the unequal treatment and an apology before we can move forward in a healthy way. So you're still refusing to be part of the family, my father stated, his voice hardening. No, I corrected gently. I'm refusing to participate in a relationship where my worth is conditional on following a predetermined path or achieving success that fits your specific definition. The door is open whenever you're ready to address the actual issue. Well, my mother said after another uncomfortable silence, we're having a family dinner next Saturday. We'd love for you to join us and put this all behind us. I recognize the tactic. Ignore the stated boundary. Extend an invitation that pretends the conflict never happened, and hope social pressure will force compliance. It was a familiar pattern from my childhood, one that had kept me seeking approval for years. I won't be able to attend, I said firmly. But thank you for the invitation. And congratulations on the National Photography Review feature. I have an awards ceremony that evening for the urban portraiture grant I received last month. It's a significant honor in my field. After ending the call, I sat quietly in my studio, surrounded by the work that had finally earned their attention, if not their understanding. The irony wasn't lost on me. My career had reached a point where even my parents couldn't dismiss it. Yet they still couldn't acknowledge the fundamental issue in our relationship. The choice before me was clear. I could return to the family fold on their terms, sacrificing my hard-won boundaries for the comfort of belonging, or I could maintain the healthier relationship I'd established with myself and my work, even if it meant continued distance from my parents. As difficult as it was, the decision wasn't really a decision at all. I had spent 8 months building a life defined by authenticity rather than external validation. Returning to a dynamic that required minimizing myself wasn't an option anymore. I opened my laptop and began working on the speech for the upcoming awards ceremony, feeling a mixture of sadness and resolve. The door to reconciliation remained open, but I wouldn't be the one to compromise the lock. The path from seeking validation to finding self-worth isn't straight or simple. It's a winding journey with unexpected detours, occasional backsliding, and moments of clarity that arrive when you least expect them. Over the past year, I've navigated this path with increasing confidence, discovering that the absence of conditional approval creates space for something far more valuable: authentic self-acceptance. My photography career has continued to flourish in ways I couldn't have imagined. The National Photography Review feature led to opportunities I'd once considered distant dreams: a solo exhibition at a respected gallery in San Francisco, an invitation to teach a master class series at the New York Institute of Photography, and most surprisingly, a book deal to publish a collection of my portrait work with accompanying essays. These professional milestones feel different now. I celebrate them fully, without the reflex of translating them into terms my parents might validate or bracing for the inevitable dismissal. The achievements stand on their own merit in a field I respect and value. More meaningful than external success has been the evolution of my creative voice. Without the subtle pressure to produce work that might finally earn parental approval, my photography has become more personal, more willing to explore complex emotions and perspectives. Critics have noted this shift, describing my recent work as more intimate and powerfully authentic. What they're seeing is the result of internal freedom, creating from a place of self-trust rather than external validation. The community I've built continues to be a source of strength and genuine connection. My friendship circle includes people who understand creative struggles, celebrate authentic achievements, and offer honest feedback without conditional approval. These relationships have taught me what true support looks like: not dismissive tolerance or backhanded compliments, but sincere engagement with both my work and my personhood. Perhaps most surprising has been the gradual transformation in my relationship with Rebecca. Without our parents as an audience for the comparative dynamic that shaped our childhood interactions, we've begun developing a connection based on mutual respect rather than competition. 3 months ago, Rebecca called me with an unexpected confession. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said before you left last Thanksgiving," she admitted, "about the different ways Mom and Dad treated us." She paused before continuing. "At first I thought you were exaggerating, but I've been paying attention since then. The way they talk about your career versus mine, the financial support they've offered, even how they introduce us to people. You were right. There's a clear pattern I never noticed before because it benefited me. Her acknowledgement meant more than I could express. Not because it validated my perspective, I'd long since stopped needing that external confirmation, but because it opened the possibility of a more honest relationship between us. Since that conversation, we've been cautiously rebuilding our sisterhood on more authentic terms. She attended the opening of my San Francisco exhibition, genuinely engaging with the work. I visited her new home, helping decorate the nursery for my soon-to-arrive niece. These interactions aren't perfect or without occasional tension, but they feel real in a way our previous relationship never did. The situation with my parents remains unresolved. After their call about the magazine feature, they've made occasional contact. Holiday greetings, forwarded family news, brief messages that carefully avoid addressing the actual conflict. I respond politely but maintain my boundary, acknowledgement and apology before resuming regular contact. I won't pretend the estrangement isn't painful. There are moments when I wish for the simplicity of unconditional family acceptance, the comfort of belonging without qualification. Holidays can be particularly difficult, as can major life milestones that traditionally involve parental presence. But I've learned that there's a fundamental difference between the pain of enforcing healthy boundaries and the pain of continually seeking approval from those unwilling or unable to give it. The former is acute but healing. The latter is chronic and corrosive. This journey has taught me that success isn't defined by others' metrics but by alignment with personal values and purpose. For years, I measured my worth through my parents' narrow lens, contorting my achievements to fit their definition of value. Breaking free from that pattern has been both the hardest and most rewarding aspect of this experience. The freedom to create without the burden of seeking approval has transformed not just my work, but my relationship with it. Photography is no longer a vehicle for external validation, but an authentic expression of how I see and engage with the world. The irony isn't lost on me that this internal shift has coincided with the external recognition I once thought would finally earn my parents' respect. I haven't permanently closed the door on reconciliation with my parents. Family relationships are complex, and people can grow and change. The boundary I've set isn't punitive but protective, creating the conditions necessary for a healthier relationship, should they choose to engage with the actual issues, rather than simply waiting for me to abandon my standards. In the meantime, I'm building a life defined by authentic connections, meaningful work, and the kind of success that resonates with my own values rather than borrowed ones. I'm learning that sometimes the most loving thing we can do, both for ourselves and ultimately for others, is to create distance from relationships that demand diminishment as the price of belonging. The most profound lesson I've learned is that worthiness isn't earned through achievement or bestowed by others' approval. It's an inherent quality we can only recognize when we stop looking for it externally. My journey continues. But for perhaps the first time, I'm walking it as myself rather than as someone trying to become worthy of love through achievement. So what about you? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who couldn't see your value? Or found yourself measuring your worth through someone else's definition of success? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help others feeling caught in similar struggles. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share to help others find their way toward authentic self-worth too. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Here's to defining success on our own terms, whatever that looks like for each of us.